Hello, everybody. I'm Pastor Steve Green. This is Refresh number 2 for this week. Today is Thursday, April 23rd, and our subject is Let this same mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. Let's read the passage that speaks about that. Philippians 2, beginning in verse 5. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation. Let's read that phrase, that last phrase, in several other translations. In the New American Standard, it says he emptied himself. In the New Revised Standard, it also says he emptied himself. In the Amplified, but stripped himself of all privileges and rightful dignity. The New Living Translation says, instead, he gave up his divine privileges. The Message Bible says he set aside the privileges of deity. So what an amazing thing that is. Jesus didn't just come to earth and inhabit a human body, but in coming to earth and inhabiting a human body, he gave up his divine privileges. He emptied himself. He made himself of no reputation. That verse continues saying, he taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Therefore, God also has highly exalted him. So he came in the form of a man. He humbled himself. He became obedient. This is what Jesus did. He committed himself to him who judges righteously. He did it as an example for us. And this is how he was exalted. You understand, exalted doesn't mean that people will bow down to you or that you will become known as the most spiritual person in your spiritual community. But it does mean that we do get exalted up into God's plan for our lives. We get exalted up into his way of living and functioning, of thinking and talking and acting. And we also get exalted up into the fullness of the blessing that he has provided for us. We read that in 1 Peter 5 and verse 6. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. Just reading a few verses later in Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 12. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. So we've read that this is called being exalted. We're now reading a few verses later that this is called working out our salvation. We understand there's different aspects to salvation. This is speaking about the aspect of God's blessing and benefit that we experience in this life as we trust him, and out of that faith that we follow him, we obey him. It says in verse 14, do all things without complaining and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless, children of God without fault, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Verse 16, holding fast the word of life. So here's the challenge. This is the question I put to you before. I want to put it to you again. Do you believe this? The reason I ask this question is because it's a challenge. It is so different from natural thinking. I believe that many of us who are followers of Christ need to take the time and make the effort to ensure that from our heart we truly believe this. Do you believe that if you'll just do what we read, let me read it again, that you become blameless and harmless, children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, that if that's what we do, if that's what you do, if that's what I do, then that in itself will cause us to have a wonderful life. It will cause us to love life and see good days. That is different than how the world thinks. The world thinks there has to be something different. You're going to need to get a better education. You're going to need to do, whatever the list of criteria or priorities are. There are many things, but they're not what God says. God says not the only thing. Perhaps you have a profession in mind that needs a certain education, certain training, certain perhaps apprenticeship, whatever the different qualifications are. We're not diminishing those things or saying that we don't need to do those things. But here's the question. Do you believe that the number one, the most important, the most influential decision you can make on the course of your life is to live a holy life, that being good in God's manner of goodness will in fact cause you to experience his blessing? That is the question. And I believe that I'm speaking to people today that the answer to that question is yes, we believe it, and we're believing it stronger every day. Have a great week.